Hey guys, welcome back to the Seasonal Movement Podcast. I'm your host, Ruben, your seasonal expert. And today we have Lara Bokovay. Did I say that right, Lara Bokovay? Can you say it for
Yeah.
me?
No,
All right,
Bokovay. You did
I
right.
said it right. Awesome. Yeah, I have an accent, guys. You know that. So I usually get stuck on some of the last names. So she is a mother, a guide, a true teller, helping women return to themselves. She supports mothers and women in reconnecting with their bodies as a source of wisdom, healing, and alignment. Her work is rooted in reminding us that just like the seasons, our bodies carry natural rhythms we are meant to honor and live by. So help me welcome Lara. Lara, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start with a question. As we did our discovery call, you mentioned something that I haven't really heard before, but I already kind of knew. And it's like a balance, a harmony I'm trying to find between the two of them. You mentioned that, you're always on the 5D, meaning you understand, you have your body, you live in this world, but your tendency is to live spiritually. And you mentioned that my work is really positive because I'm helping people how to live in the 3D world, our bodies, our rhythms, the seasons, the world. And I like to think that I'm kind of like transferring one to the other, meaning like I'm kind of creating a good base so that people can jump into a more spiritual base, but we start with the basis. Can you help the audience understand what you mean by 5D, 3D? And I imagine there's a 4D in the middle. I'm not sure, but I have heard that many, many times, and I really want to hear in detail what does that mean.
So I will just start with the different dimensions where there's so many different realms of consciousness. So that's really when we talk about 3D, 5D, 4D, 12D, you name it, it's different realms of our conscious awareness, sort of like different timelines that we're having conversations with. And it was interesting when we were having those conversations, we were talking about your work and my work, and you embody more so masculine energy operating from your masculine operating system. And I am in my feminine operating in my feminine operating system. So we both have both masculine and feminine energy. And it's interesting because we were talking about my intuitive work, and a lot of times I am having conversations in the 5D or in other realms. It doesn't need to be the 5D per se, but we'll just use that because that's a terminology that people really use a lot, 3D and 5D. And so I'm always having conversations with everyone energetically, telepathically, you name it. So that would be that other realm of conscious awareness. So as a feminine operating in my feminine operating system, or working with my feminine energy more so, even though the masculine energy would be taking action, when I'm doing intuitive work and when I'm channeling and when I'm, connecting with people telepathically, through signs, symbols, awarenesses, thoughts, you name it, I'm always dancing in the 5D. I'm always up in the ethers having these conversations and working. And the masculine's role is to ground the feminine back in. So they say that the feminine leads the way as the oracle, as the intuitive, moving forward. And the masculine is who actually takes the feminine wisdom and actually puts it into action here on this 3D earth plane that we're living in. So a lot of your work that you do in regards to helping people actually integrate on the actual physical earth is you taking that masculine action and actually helping people come back into their bodies, as opposed to I'm always in energetically, oracally, spiritually connected and leading the way. As in I would have those intuitive premonitions. I would see what's coming. I would know what's coming. I'm having conversations with maybe 7 different people at once. And then all of a sudden it shows up in that 3D reality, in that earth plane. So I could be having conversations with someone and then all of a sudden in the 3D, they would drive right in front of me. So once again, it's like that would be the pulling in, the bringing in of these conversations. So a lot of times with some of the work that you do, it's getting people back in the rhythm. It's figuring out, what their body's telling them, all that kind of stuff. And that is all grounding them into this reality so that they can function in this reality as opposed to feeling out of calibration, out of alignment, all of that kind of stuff, because they're not actually grounded into their bodies. So does that explain it a little bit better?
100%. I have to be honest. I go back and forth. So at one point in my career, in my life, I was very into routines and what we have to do. And as I have evolved, I have gone to transitions and I have experimented like, oh, just live life and, things come your way, like just let it flow. The business runs itself. And I have gone very left, very right, and I'm kind of finding that middle ground, which I believe is a seasonal movement. But what I often struggle with a little bit is that I believe that some people get the left, some people get the right, and who really gets the middle. I feel it's like a select few, perhaps. I always see how there is many people working on what we're calling the 5D, the spiritual realm, and it can be something like the power of the mind, breathing and creating your reality now. It can be it can take many shapes in my perception, what I have seen, but I can very identify, hey, like that is definitely not happening through a routine or through eating something or through, so I sometimes discount talking about one or the other, and I try to like find the middle ground between the two of them. I like to think that that is kind of where the magic happens. Like, not forget that one exists and the other is the only way to get there, but actually knowing that they are connected.
Well, it's
And
about finding that balance, right? Like you can't, the reality is, I'll give a great example of this morning. This morning we were running late for school and, my daughter was just like, "Oh no, I'm not gonna, maybe we can't go do this because then I'm not gonna have time to play." And it was like, I think we were going to pick up breakfast this morning. And I said, "Oh no, food always comes before play. Like, like we have to nourish our bodies and our vessels and play, seeing your friends, you'll see them at the next recess and all that kind of stuff. But what is the priority is feeding the body. That is the priority. And so, that is we have to connect with our bodies and nourish our bodies and still, work with the vessel that is here, earth side in the 3D, and that's where it's about creating that balance. It's about, yes, not necessarily just routines, but it's like, no, like what do you need for you to function properly in this reality in your body, and that would be sleep, food, all that kind of stuff. So that is it's an important lesson. We can't just be dancing up in the ethers. It's fun, but we have to also figure out how to integrate that so we can play in both. And I mean, the masculine can still play in both, the feminine can play in both, but it's important that we do all those things to sort of ground us into reality for us to be able to be in alignment, for us to function, for us to be healthy, all of the above.
you use the word alignment. I truly believe in alignment, the alignment of the body, the mind, the spirit. And what I find interesting is that through our previous conversation, you share that through at one point in your life, you weren't really in alignment with what we're calling the 3D in this conversation, which is your body, which is this world. But at the same time, you were still able to guide your clients to connect to the spiritual realm, and you will spend most of your time out there and trying to ignore the other. I always believe that when you are able to align them, they become more powerful, both your body, your mind, your spirit. So I found very interesting that you were still able to do one without the other, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, but
And I,
and it comes down to what I was guiding, right? In regards to next, all that kind of stuff, we can only guide others as far as we've come ourselves. And so once again, as you grow and as you evolve, and even what we teach what we need to learn or what we need to integrate, and all that kind of stuff. So it's fascinating because yes, I could guide and I could channel messages. However, when it came to 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I couldn't. I was guiding them on where they were going and next steps, but I wasn't guiding them on healing themselves because I was still in that process. So at no point did I know the weight of what it would mean to eat intuitively or, regulate your nervous system, and how that is truly a fundamental foundational piece in anyone's healing journey. So, I didn't have that awareness of the importance of it. They always say you don't know how important it is until it is important. And so it's one of those things. It's like, no, over my own healing journey, awareness journey, all of the above, it's like, right, how important is that? I would get jittery and know I need to eat a sandwich when I was channeling all day long or reading a lot of people, but I didn't lead with self-care and self-love. And I didn't lead with that. And that leading with self-care and self-love and taking care of myself in the physical 3D is just as much as important as working through all the inner child stuff in the mind, right? Like we can work through all of the unraveling of disempowering beliefs and everything that sort of is in our mind. But then it's like, okay, now how does that physically look in reality? How does that actually, and I'll give another great example of that is talking about self-care. You know, when you come in your house and there's like shoes all over the front door, like just like, everyone takes off their shoes and it's scattered everywhere. I never really thought of that as being a lack of self-care. So as a single mom, if I had to leave the house right away and I had to get out in an emergency, if I tripped over those shoes, if I didn't put them away, and if I tripped over those shoes and then hit my head on the doorknob and then whatever, as it sort of progresses, me not picking up those shoes was a lack of self-care. Me going outside my house without a cell phone so I couldn't call anyone for help is a lack of self-care. So those are how it looks like in the 3D reality that you wouldn't even think about. So I'm on this self-care, self-love journey, but I'm still not putting away my shoes at the back door. So it's like that action would be the tangible action in the 3D of, oh no, that itself is grounding in that self-care, self-love to put away the shoes. And so once again, you're working on all these things and you're like, okay, right, how does this actually look in my reality? Okay, how does self-care actually present? What are the actions you actually do in the 3D that actually embody the awareness that you're having in regards to the healing of self-care and self-love?
I love that perspective. It really is making me feel very compassionate because I sometimes have a hard time telling people, do this, do this, do this, do that, do this. Because at the end of the day, it comes down to take care of ourselves. We have choices that we can make. And the little angle that I bring to it is that they are seasonal. Like, what you do in the winter is different than what you do in the summer. But at the same time, it's like there is a guidance that you can follow and you have to do them. But now that you're mentioning is self-care and self-love, it just makes it so much loving, right? It's like if you don't do these, I already know you're going to struggle. Like I already know based on the experiences that when we do this, our life becomes so much better.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to ground this because I think that's what that word that you just mentioned, self-care and love, just really grounds the conversation of the things that perhaps we have to do to show in the world how we care for ourselves and
Mm-hmm.
others.
100%.
I do also believe that a way to ground this, to get from the spiritual realm and talking about the way that we operate within our world and within our day to day, is also acknowledge the harmony that we can create between our nervous system. That is something that you just touched in your response, and you have a story about it. Like you realize as you weren't taking care of your body, you were actually in a disbalanced function between your nervous system, and that really opened your eyes. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's what like kind of click. So I would like to go in that into number one, what does it mean to have a dysregulated nervous system? Like are we talking about we're on and off all the time? Like what does that even mean? And then secondly, what was that transition like? And at that point, like were there any practices that can help anybody hearing to identify, oh my gosh, like I'm going through this right now?
Yeah, nervous system dysregulation can show up in so many different ways. And I'll give some practical examples. So, to help. So, when our nervous system is there to keep us safe, essentially, right? And when we don't feel safe, our nervous system is dysregulated. But there's so many things that would make us feel unsafe. So, when you're going through the motions of life and in relationship with everyone, whether it's a partner, whether it's friends, whether it's family, whether it's your child, and my biggest awareness of my nervous system dysregulation or not being regulated was in parenting, is I was so easily triggered and I was so easily reactive, or even with sometimes with people, with family or friends, I would truly black out. And when I say black out is like, and these were all mechanisms of survival for me. Like everything that I did, all my reactions were survival mechanisms. So it wasn't like, even, yelling. Well, what is yelling? What is raising your voice? What is being reactive? How different is it when you can take a calm approach and not take it personally and not, take to heart what's happening and actually have that bird's eye view and then, manage the situation or like look into the situation. But, like from parenting, a dysregulated nervous system could be you numbing and scrolling on your phone, or you being hyperfixated on doing other tasks and not actually paying attention and prioritizing what actually needs to be dealt with first, right? So it's like, a lot of times even what they would call like ADHD or ADD, any like hyperattention deficit disorder or attention deficit disorder, that's you dysregulated. It's dysregulated. And so a lot of times when you look at, your frontal cortex and all that kind of stuff, you can see how you're actually then in fight or flight, or you are dysregulated, or you are in reactive mode. But it's all different things to keep yourself safe, or trained and learned behavior that you had to do in order to keep yourself safe. So, not getting to the point, right? We go around in circles and not get to the point. And that's us trying to make sure that we're not in trouble. And, we always think that we're in trouble. So then we never actually spit out exactly what we need to say. We sort of like go around, or, once again, not even talking and going numb and not engaged or tuning out. Once again, we do that to keep ourselves safe, so everything that we do to keep ourselves safe. And the reality is, doing that and not being present in the moment doesn't allow us to actually deal with what's in the present. So when you have a child and your emotion and your own nervous system isn't regulated, your child also doesn't know how to regulate. And so for me, when I was coming to parenting, like when my daughter just couldn't hear what I was saying, it's because she was dysregulated. And who taught her to be dysregulated? Who taught her to have anxiety? Who taught her to do those things? That is a direct reflection of me and her father. And so, when we go through those things and you're like, okay, wow, until I get my nervous system in check, until I know how to calm myself down, until I know that I'm safe, until I can ground back into my body, I can't guide or lead her. And our job as parents is to lead our children. And so, when it comes to that kind of stuff, the nervous system regulation work and the different things that I've done between technologies and different modalities and supplements and breath work and all those types of things to sort of ground me back into my body, being grounded back into my body allowed me to be present and allowed me to stop going into fight or flight and allowed me to sort of say, right, stop being so reactive, stop taking it personally, be the grown up, you are the grown up leading. And so many times we're just so conditioned to react and, we revert when we're triggered, we become children again. We go back to the same child that learned all these behaviors and mechanisms for survival. So it's, as a parent, you sort of need to stay in the parent role. And to do that, you have to regulate your nervous system so you don't abandon your child in those moments because you can't get your own, stuff
Yeah,
together.
I agree. So to even ground the conversation even deeper, bring the masculine into how we do things, I find that everything that you had said, I agree with. And something to take it even deeper is becoming self-aware to a very high level. So one
Yes.
thing is that you intuitively can become aware, but a lot of us perhaps don't have the trust in ourselves to know, like, well, that's just who I am, and I'm gonna honor that. I have an epigenetic app through part of my program that allow us to know, like, it is basically a scientific research on your own body to understand many different things, like your diet, like what is best for you is different best for me, like your sleeping habits, like are you a night owl, an early owl, a night owl, an early riser. And then one of them that is extremely interesting is that even our nervous systems are wired in a specific way. So through this app, there's a lot of information. One of them is called the Power Hour, and it's very different from me than from everybody else. Something that came up there that once I read it, I realized, oh my gosh, like I get it now. I get what's happening. It's like between 8 and 9. It's like the time that I'm supposed to like relax. Like my nervous system had enough. Like I wake up wired, ready to go. I'm very alert. But by the time the evening and the afternoon kind of start creeping in, it's like time that I need to just kind of calm myself because I'm like overloaded. I'm on. And with children, that can be very difficult. Like with children, my 3 children during that time, and that happened last night, it's like they're just very active and they want to be around me. I don't know why. And they want to play between them and they want me to play with them. And it's like literally like my worst time to play with them. Like I will ask them throughout the day, but during that time, I don't want to. But becoming self aware gives us that power of like, this is who I am. I can honor this. I can still be a good father because I won't yell to the kid anymore because now I'm aware that that is my tendency. Like the reason that I explode during that time of the day is because like that is when I need to do something, but due to my role, I'm experiencing something different. So I think that there is grace when we get to know ourselves at a very deep level, and it can be done through multiple ways. Now, what I like to take it is even deeper into the way that I found to do it because I think that it really is very helpful. It's like a scientific a study of your own body. But the other thing is that even though we're all different, we all have certain tendencies. And what I find interesting in the work that I do is to identify how those triggers appear seasonally. So there are some triggers that are natural instincts, like we were mentioning, survival mechanisms that are from us. Like as a child, I used to stop talking so I wouldn't get in trouble. So when I feel like I'm on, again, my nervous system is on the flight or fight mode, I will shut down and I will act like a child and I won't speak myself out. Now, that is something that you learn, but there is something else that we are actually born with, which are instincts, which are survival instincts that humans have to be able to be where we are now. We want to talk and we want to think that we're very advanced, and we are, but we have DNA memory within us that has carried through generations. And a lot of times we don't really understand that. So when it comes to the seasons, it's super interesting to me and fascinated to see how those survival mechanisms turn on and off. Like in the winter, when the cold shows up, don't you think our bodies and our minds think a little different naturally so that we survive? Of course we do. So I just want to mention that these patterns follow a yearly rhythm.
Hmm.
And when we become aware, again, we can let go of that guilt. Like, oh my gosh, like, why I act this way? Well, now you know. And what can you do? Now you can have a choice. So I find so much power in learning when you are on and off. And one tip I want to give is how can we start to notice that? Because, okay, we have the concept, we have very good examples, but how can we start noticing when we are on and off? So we talk about frequencies, we talk about wavelengths, and when it comes down to wavelengths, when we are in a rested, in a peaceful, in a grounded state, the wavelength is very harmonious, and also the part of our brain that is activated is very different than when we are alert and on survival mode. When we're in survival mode, the waves are very fast up and down, fast up and down. So you mentioned the shivers. Is that what you just said, right? Like when you are like on and like you are just ready to do something or you are anxious, that is your brain acting in a very fast wave, keeping you alert. Those thoughts are very different. And what I want you to start training yourself on is identifying them because they actually feel very differently. So that is a tip that I have for you. You know, when it comes down to survival mechanisms, I have a question, which is that how is trauma in survival mechanisms, how is trauma stored in our bodies? I know that fascia release is something that is very beneficial, but I want to know, like, okay, so we were talking earlier 3D, 5D, you know, like I feel like the trauma usually, if it's not a body trauma, it's like a mind trauma or a spiritual trauma. How come it gets to our bodies? Like, what is that connection? How can we store trauma in our bodies when it's actually a psychological trauma that we're having?
I mean, our bodies are literally, we can heal our own bodies. Like we're quite, our mind and our knowing is quite powerful. But like when it comes to actual trauma, I mean, trauma can show up in multiple different ways. Like, and when I say storing deep in your fascia, like our bodies hold on to memory of fight or flight or when we're not safe. And so, you know, different areas, different meridians in our bodies, you know, are all connected to different emotions that we feel, i.e., like the spleen is, you know, our betrayal and grief. And, you know, depending on where, what is going on in your body, whether it's in your legs or your knees, because there's meridians in your legs for your spleen and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So when you actually start working through your body, all these emotions, all the sadness, all the grief, all the betrayal, all of the above get stored in your body. Louise Hay speaks to that a lot too, in regards to what the body, you know, what the body is saying. Like when your lower back is hurting, it means that you feel unsupported. So once again, just the emotion of feeling lack of support. If your lower back's starting to hurt, you're like, right, okay, how am I emotionally feeling unsupported at the moment? So you can start actually working with the emotional and energetic meridians in your body to actually know and identify what's going on. Sometimes even when you're, you know, we always say like, you know, what's going on in your head isn't always accurate, right? Your ego and your mind and the fear and all that kind of stuff start playing up stories. But what actually, how is it actually looking in your body? Like for me, I always distend when I'm feeling unsafe or when I'm holding. And what I mean by that is all of a sudden I could literally feel like I've gained 15 pounds all just around my torso, like just around my midsection when I feel unsafe. And so, or when I've gone through a big thing. And that is energetically, what does the feminine do? I have to protect my organs. I will expand here to protect. And so when we start realizing that our body truly starts reflecting the deep emotional stuff that we're feeling or the root cause of it. You know, a lot of times people don't identify that their arthritis is actually, you know, something going on energetically. Like, when did this start? You know, when you start looking at your body as energetic meridians and emotional meridians through your body, you can actually start going through, it's almost like they're like little breadcrumb, you know, seed
Signals.
plants for you to pick up. And you're like, oh, right, there's a clue. Okay, let's dive in there. Or so once again, it's like, okay, you might not know where to start. Your head's like, no, I'm not stressed. I don't know what's going on. You're like, okay, where is it presenting? You know what I mean? Like, so many times, like, same thing too. Like, when I look at my injuries, it's like, why am I always taken out at the Achilles? Well, you know, once again, it's like, well, what does the Achilles represent? You know what I mean? Like, you know, so when you start looking at, okay, right, like, what's going on with my, you know, plantar fasciitis, or with my Achilles, or with my wrists, or with my back, or with my shoulder, you know, it's the same. It's in your neck. Is it your neck or your shoulder? Where's the knot? So when you start going through your body and actually sort of saying, okay, right, this is what's going on. What is the spiritual, energetic, you know, meridian, acupressure point? What does that actually represent? What emotion does it represent? You can start actually like finding a trail, and then following it to start unraveling stuff. Because a lot of times, going back to the whole concept of awareness, yeah, most of us don't have awareness. Like, one of my biggest lessons in my healing was actually to become aware. Like, I was going on autopilot. I was always intuitive. I always knew, but I had no self-awareness. So I was aware of everyone else, but I had no awareness of what was actually going on for me. Because once again, and I'll give this as a prime example, when we can connect back to our bodies, when we can connect back to our vessel in the 3D reality, for example, how many times, and I'll speak for myself, but also probably a lot of women and men, is like, okay, how many times did your stomach growl and you just go, oh yeah, I'll eat in 2 hours? You just completely disregarded what your body is asking you to do. You just push through it. You plow through it because we're so conditioned to go and suppress what we're actually feeling that you don't actually say, right, I was hungry 2 hours ago. No wonder I'm lightheaded 3 hours later and I haven't eaten. You know, so many times I go, oh my gosh, I just can't focus at work and all that kind of stuff. And you go, well, how many hours are you sleeping? And they go, oh, 6. You know, it's not that, you know, I'm doing too much screen time before bed. And you're like, okay, well, you've just solved your own problem. Like, when people actually start recognizing what's going on in their body, that leads to that level of self-awareness. Like, you have to stop suppressing or gaslighting yourself to think that you're not, like, right? We are our own biggest, we gaslight ourselves all the time to think that, you know, it's like, you know, if we can get back into what our body's telling us intuitively, it's like, do you want to go? Is it a yes, or is there any resistance? Like, you know, when you ask yourself, do I want to do this? Do I don't want to do this? Ask yourself in a mirror and look at your face. If your face goes like this and you're just like, and you make any weird mannerism with your face, you're like, hey, your body's resisting doing that action or doing that activity. But our mind, if we weren't looking at our face, we just go, oh, I'm uncomfortable, whatever, I'm going to do it anyways. And you're like, you've just self-abandoned yourself. You've just self-abandoned yourself and chosen not to actually have that level of self-awareness and just suppress what your body is actually telling you. So it's such a, self-awareness leads to so much freedom, because it's not just giving yourself grace and understanding why you show up, how you show up, and understanding, you know, yourself on a deeper level. But having that level of self-awareness is so empowering, because then you actually can correct it. You can actually choose differently. But until you know what you're actually doing, you can't choose differently, right? Until you can actually have that deep understanding, you can't go down another path.
That is why the app, in my opinion, and there's a million apps out there, that's why the app is so important, because the one thing that we, in a way, don't control is when we become aware. It is a gift. It really is a gift from God. We can seek it all we want. We can do all the tasks. We can create the conditions for that to happen. We can enroll ourselves into places. But sometimes, until you are ready, it's just not going to happen. Sometimes it happens in the most unexpected way. Sometimes it happens just when you planted it. But the reality is that before you're even aware at a deep spiritual level, you can still take clues from the app. Again, it's just like, and I'm not saying my app, I'm just saying any good guiding system that exists can at least help you go in the same direction or a similar direction until you become aware, and then there is even so much meaning already. You don't have to wait years to get started on something because you're not aware. Guess what? It is a gift. So I want to go back on why it's so important to see energy as a sign. And I just want to build a little bit of background here because the meridians, the energy, like if you dissect the body in a post-mortem evaluation, like when if you just look at the body, you're not going to find some sort of energy, like it's not going to be found. Now there is technology today that shows that, it used to be called an aura. Now it's called a biofield. And the interesting thing is that Eastern philosophy, Chinese traditional medicine has been practicing this for, I believe, 3,000 years. So it has been around for a while, and in Western civilizations, we try not to pay too much attention to it. We discard it. Like it will be very inconvenient to actually live by it because we are surrounded by so much electromagnetic frequencies. Now, what I find that is interesting is that it's not just in our body, it's all over us. Like the air that you breathe has electricity to it, has different frequencies to it. Like the air that, like what you see around is not empty. There is stuff there that you can't see. Like we can only hear so much, we can only see so much. There is more than what we can experience through our senses in this world because we're extremely limited, like very, very, very limited. So how does your heart beat? Is electricity. Like how your brain works is literally electricity. Like you are full of energy. So what I find extremely interesting is that is happening outside of us and inside of us. There is not really like that much of a disconnection when you actually understand it. As we go through the seasons, there are energies that come from those changes, from going from the yin phase to the yang phase. You see it all over nature, like going from the full moon as it shrinks or as it expands. And to that level, like, you can cut your hair as the moon is expanding so that your hair grows thicker and stronger, or vice versa. So what is interesting is that whatever is happening around us, as the energies shift throughout the seasons, we are going to feel it, literally. Like we are 70%, I think 74% water. So we're constantly receiving those frequencies and we feel them. Now, what is interesting is what are we doing about it? Like, are we living completely disconnected from it? So when we feel it, we wonder what is wrong, what's going on, like why do I feel this way?
Well,
Like,
that's the thing. I think most people are completely disconnected, and that's truly, even in the work I do, it's reconnecting, right? It's
yeah,
reconnecting, regrounding, realigning, and coming back to that wholeness, right? A
yeah.
wholeness of that energy of you as the vessel. So I think that most people are
Wow.
living disconnected.
So that is, in essence, what the seasonal movement is trying to bring back to the collective consciousness as a way to connect back. There are many ways to connect. There are many ways to become aware. And I believe that one of the ways is to actually start doing it and be guided through that process so that you can experience it and you can be supported to it. The routines are like the measurable way of how you interact to a specific season. We talk a lot about nervous system regulation, and when it comes down to the seasons in the summer, just go outside and be barefoot on the ground. And most people might do that without even really thinking about it, and then they feel great, and they don't really even know why. Well, your energy is being regulated by your environment.
But the important thing is, and in the work that I do, it's then pulling that thread through, right? So it's like I could ground, but you need to pull the thread through. So it's like you can have, it's like, a lot of times when people do shadow work, a shadow is a shadow because it's behind you, right? There's some triggers that you can be aware of yourself, but there's a lot of awarenesses that you would either need a bioscan or you would need a coach or a guide like myself to sort of help witness you in those moments because you can't witness yourself. That's why a shadow is a shadow
Exactly.
because it's
Yeah, you
behind you,
can't see
right?
yourself. You might get that shadow and you bring it up to light, and then it can be interpreted and it can be guided to
Yeah,
transformation, to being the best version of yourself and
100%.
prevent some of that negative talk that, like, going in the wrong direction, right? Because that's what I truly believe is that even though we're numb, that's why I say, the app, like, even if you're numb, you can be guided. You just gotta get started. Even if we're numb, I truly believe that we all feel it. We just don't know how interpreting, like we don't know how to interpret that feeling. And what I like to think is that a feeling is just a nervous system reaction. It's just your brain producing a hormone or a neurochemical. And most people just completely react out of, again, going back to trauma, going back to survival. They don't go through the process of really understanding what is that they're feeling. So I find interesting that as the seasons change, we're feeling different stuff. Sometimes we're feeling high stuff, sometimes we're feeling low stuff. All of them are here to guide us. And we can learn so much from the low moments, not just the high moments. Actually, it's a lot easier to learn from those low moments when we know what to do, when we actually go deep into it and bring the lesson out of it. Sometimes when we are up high, all we're doing is just going. Like we're enjoying the party, we just keep going. It's a lot harder to reflect sometimes when we are up in a high mountain top instead of when we're low. So, as it comes down to your experience, your life, I know that you have made some drastic changes from when you were in your low points. You had to choose to have surgery or to heal yourself through what we're talking about, like through natural practices, aligning your energy, doing certain things that don't come with surgery, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how come you were brave enough to go the no surgery route when you have an Achilles tendon injury, and you actually were able to heal yourself? The reason I'm bringing this up is because if you believe so much into it that you're willing to do that, I think it might inspire others to look at it in their own ways and to take action in their own intensity. But I think that that experience you had is extremely intense, and it will be very beneficial for people to say, "Wow, this actually works."
I mean, it's dismantling a lot of fear like that, like, the root of it, when it's like, I've always been who I am as an individual doesn't give up easily. And I have survived this long. And so it's giving yourself credit for that in that sense. And it's like, I've always gone against the grain, and I've always, not necessarily followed the norm or the path. And when I became aware of all the other outside of the specific medical system, when I started becoming aware of different modalities and different types of practitioners and different types of technologies and supplementation and all of the above, you energetically also, like, if believe it, so be it. It's like like it was truly a choice. I wanted to heal naturally, and for me, I knew that it was possible. But it took me a long time to trust it. And I think that's the difference. And you mentioned self-trust earlier in our conversation. And I truly, for me, with my Achilles injury, I had a full 3.5 centimeter tear. Like, my Achilles was not attached to my leg, like, in the sense. And, I had a broken hand. I had a young daughter. I have a 135-pound dog. Like, I was just like, if I have surgery, then I'll be out, and this is the case. And, and once again, is the surgery as beneficial? And I have all these modalities that I was working with already that I knew that could heal cellularly, and I knew that it could help the body or support the body in its healing, any type of deviation from normal. I knew that I had that, but energetically, I had to trust it. I had to believe it. And you can't. The problem is where people get lost, and we were talking about feelings and all this kind of stuff. And yes, it's easier to even react to the negative things and come up with the awarenesses. But the reality is, when we talk about manifestation and all that kind of stuff, people actually don't know what abundance feels like. So even the positive things, they might experience abundance, but they would never equate it as that. And so even the positive things, okay, what's joy? It's like, what's fun? What's laughter? What's all that kind of stuff? You really have, you do it and it feels good. And so it doesn't trigger you into a self-reflection of healing. But when you're actually being like, right, I want a state of abundance. I actually know what abundance feels like. Okay, what is that feeling, right? What is it when you don't have all the stresses of financials and you feel loved by everyone? And so you don't actually recognize the positive feelings or the negative feelings. Like, when I say completely disconnected, you don't really, it's like, okay, well, what does joy feel like? Okay, when you think about, holding your kids or having a really good laugh with them, that's joy. That feeling in your body when you're down, you're like, I just really want to have fun and have joy. It's then channeling what that felt like originally, and then that actually comes into your reality. So, but going back to my Achilles, it was truly a choice. It was a choice that it was just like, okay, I know how powerful the mind is. And I think this is the difference. We are so powerful as human beings, and we do not give ourselves enough credit of how powerful we are. And it is just a choice at the end of the day. But the choice has to come from fear, right? It's like, okay, fear of, okay, if I do this, then what's going to happen? It's like, no. I just have to choose that this is what I'm doing to move forward. And it is, I have to choose and trust that it's like, right, I have all the scientific studies in front of me. I could go on PubMed all I want and research all these things. And
Hmm.
I know that there's studies that show that these holistic modalities can do this. So I can choose that route or I can choose that. But where people get lost is they want to dance in both worlds, and you
Yeah.
can't dance in both worlds. You'll never be free if you play in both worlds. You cannot play in one system and give all the medical practitioners all the authority and still try to heal naturally. You can't do
Hmm.
it because you'll always then fear if they say, oh, you're not coming along fast enough. You're automatically riddled with fear. You think that they have the authority, and then you have to respond to them and you disregard all the other stuff. So truly, it is, you have to choose one way or the other. I know I can heal naturally. You choose that, you go with that, and you work through all the fears that would throw you off course of why you don't think that's actually possible for you.
Now,
Or you go the other way and you totally trust that type of
yeah.
system, and then you say, okay, right, I'm at the mercy of whatever. So it's like, once again, if you know that there's a possibility, you have to trust it and go 100%. You can't do 20, 30, 80, 20,
Mm.
like, you know what I mean? Like, you have to just choose and then stick with it, because energetically, even going back to trauma, fear, all that kind of stuff, it presents in your body. You don't think you'll walk again, you won't walk again. You think that
Mm.
you can, right? You
Mm.
want to give up. It's sort of like even in childbirth, they're like push, and you're like, I can't do it, and you're like, no, they've done it for thousands and hundreds of thousands of years before
Yeah.
you. It's just like,
Yeah.
right, I can do this, and you're like,
Yeah.
so, but it's a mindset. But we so easily trick ourselves into thinking that something is not possible, whether it's abundance, whether it's joy, whether it's love, you name it. When there's any shadow of a doubt, that will literally manifest into our reality. So our
Mm.
reality is a direct reflection of our own internal knowing and belief system. So it's like, you want a beautiful life, you have to believe that it's possible for yourself. You want freedom, you have to believe that you could do it. You want millions, you have to believe that, that's possible. Like, if you start squashing, one of the things that I work with so many times with so many of my clients is they've stopped daydreaming. They stopped actually casting a vision. They squashed the possibilities for themselves before even trying, because they put so many limitations on where what they think is possible. And so it's like, no, 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 you have to think, right, I am a being, I can heal myself, let's do this. Or, oh my gosh, like, my life is so chaotic. Well, it's chaotic on the outside because you truly believe that it's chaotic on the inside. So once again, going back to nervous system regulation, if you're like this all the time, that's how your life is going to present externally. And so
Mm.
when people find that balance, when people find that rhythm, when people find that freedom, when people feel finally light and they can breathe again, it's because that's how they feel on the inside. And so that's what's actually, being co-created and manifested on the outside, on the
And I have
external.
to admit that this is work that is a daily kind of work, meaning like
Yeah,
sometimes we get in some patterns that are, and I have experienced that. I have everything in the world, like I'm experiencing abundance right now, and I have it, and I'm thankful, and I'm just like chilling and enjoying life. And then there are other times where perhaps I'm not feeling that as much, but I still have the power to become aware. Wow, like what I'm experiencing now on the outside is actually a reflection of the inside. So thank you so much for
exactly.
bringing that up, because I can see that happening in my life, and knowing how to go about, then that's extremely helpful. Now, I do want to mention that some of the natural processes that you went through, surely I know for a fact that were having to do with the mind and spiritual work, but there are others that were more in alignment with perhaps food, like eating seasonally. I know that you share that with me, like your supplements. It was also about eating in the season. So I think I find interesting through our conversation that when we bring that into this world, and just look at the power of what we can do right now, sure, there is going to be scientific research that will back it up. There is basically scientific research that will back everything up. Like that's what I have come to conclude. Like by writing my book, it's like, okay, you can find scientific research that will back anything. What is
Yep,
important is number one, your choice, like what you're talking about. Like nothing can replace the thoughts that are going through your head, which again, there is scientific evidence about. This very famous book about talking to the water, and the water will reflect those positive or negative thoughts in the quality, I believe, or in the way that they freeze. There were different experiments about it, and the same thing that somebody was talking to the water is what we are thinking. And again, we are 74% water. Like we are going to manifest that. And whether it's pain in our bodies or whether it's the reality that we don't want to experience, then that's going to manifest. Now, what I find interesting is another conversation that we had. You call it ancestral memory. I believe you use the word ancestral. I tend to use DNA memory. I
DNA,
think
generational patterning, ancestral healing,
yes.
all of the above.
So some of that we can see, like the reason that I have more beard, more hair, the reason that my skin tone is the way it is based on where my ancestors live around the equator. Because that was an optimization to absorb more light, less light, to reflect, to reject some of that abundance of light, and then compare that to somebody that lives in Russia or Ukraine. Their skin might be whiter or their eye colors might be lighter so that they can absorb more light because they get less light. What I find interesting is that as we have moved and turned into a globalized world, now I live in the Midwest, so during certain times of the year, I don't get as much light. So since I'm not optimized to absorb as much light, that can affect me differently than somebody that is optimized through that time of the year. But the inverse happens. Somebody with a pale skin and light eyes and light hair, it gets really red and it will burn a lot during the summertime. Again, it's because it's not optimized for that amount of sunlight. Now, this is just so that we can put it into perspective. Like that happens at a genetical, physical level, but that also happens at a genetical, invisible level. So when we're talking about ancestral patterns, I have a story in my book, and there are many of them. The one that I like to refer to is that after the Second World War, a lot of Germans, after they went through, it's called famine, like when there was no food around. Uh, so their generations following them were exhibiting some similar traits that were developed based on previous generations. They did a study, I believe it was over 1,000 people, and they found common issues. I don't remember right now if it was like obesity or if it was like, even schizophrenia. I don't remember what was the actual result, but it was all related to the lack of food that the previous generation experienced and how they grew up. So I can see that at a genetical level, but there is even more to it. So can you talk about that from your perspective? Because I like to have many different perspectives so that we can say, listen, a lot of the things that we're experiencing right now are not even done in our lives. Like it could have been a grandfather. Some people believe it could have been you in a different life. I think everybody has a certain belief, but what I think that we can all agree is that you can call it yourself on a different life or you can call it your grandparents. I see that trend happening at a genetical level. So can you please dive deep there? Because I think that's going to be a really good landing place for us as we start, landing the plane here on this episode.
I mean, there's two components of it. So like one I'm just going to talk about is honey. So like so many of us geographically where we are, so honey is like an elixir of like multiple different healing modalities for antimicrobial and antibacterial and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time too, our bodies crave and accept the honey that we were born in. So for example, I will crave the geographical area of honey. For me, I'll find it tastes better and that will support my immune system and my allergies and all this kind of stuff. But if I were to buy honey from across the country, my body won't receive it the same way. So geographically, we crave the flowers, the pollens, everything geographically where we're born, where that is. So for example, my cousin will crave honey from Manitoba as opposed to she likes the taste better there because the trees, the pollens, the wildflowers are different from Ontario honey. So depending on also where you're from, you'll crave different things based on genetically where you came into this plain earth side. But from ancestral generational patterning, we hold trauma at least 7 generations. So our cells, research shows that our cells hold on to at least 7 generations of cellular memory. So what does that look like? So for example, my background is Eastern European and, Ukrainian, Russian, Bolshevik, that area. So it's like when we talk about the trauma that is stored in the body, even though I haven't experienced some of the famine, some of the war, some of the scarcity as my ancestors, my cellular DNA holds on to that fear, that scarcity, those patterns. So, when different things arise, it's very common for me to hoard, to get different things. And once again, I have no memory of that here, but cellularly, I will stock up on different things based on my DNA patterning, right? And then based on my DNA patterning too, I'll have less fear around different things. So it's like, like been there, done that, bought the t-shirt energetically, generationally. So, the fears also are very different compared to someone who hasn't experienced that. The fears or the awarenesses that I have passed down by the generations, when we talk about generational patterning, when we talk about self-worth, when we talk about self-love, when we talk about you name it, right? When we talk about performance, when we talk about driving, when we talk about, everything that we inherit from our parents are inherited from their parents, are inherited from their parents. So generally speaking too, as we become so multicultural, multi-generational, all that kind of stuff, I still, even though I might have not lived that specific experience of having to flee somewhere, my mother was raised by the women that did. And so therefore she's carrying the still the fight or flight, the on edge, the alertness of what their parents and their parents were. So, even the, lack of trust or, you name a fear, you name a trauma, you name, a disempowering belief, that is all, it cycles through the generations. So, a lot of times when we start doing ancestral patterning, I could see how my mom was taught that from her mom, and from her mom she was taught it by 3 women who had that, and then they carry that. So you can actually see the generational patterning through lineage of the same story that they might have experienced 4 years ago or 4 generations ago, but it's still so alive in this present generation because we've been raised and conditioned by our ancestors that have come for us, and they hold on to that. So it's like if someone doesn't trust a specific body, that is generational. That's not just what you've believed in this lifetime, that has been seeded, like a lot of the systemic fears and systemic racism and like all that kind of stuff, like that is generational, that gets passed down through generations. So it's like even how our bodies, how my body is created very differently than someone who's not, you know what I mean? Like my body is created for walking and foraging, and and there's some people that their bodies were created very differently, you know what I mean? And that's the beautiful thing when you start actually observing cultures and societies all around the world. You can see how and people's bodies have changed, like you said, to actually optimize and work in the environments that they are. One of the funniest things was I used to work in Mexico selling sunscreen in a previous lifetime. And it was so interesting. So I sold natural products down there, but so often individuals with darker skin would have the worst burns. And they always said, and they're like, oh my gosh, like, why am I have the worst heat rash or prickly heat or whatever you want to call it? I'm built for this, like, and I said, no, you're not. You've lived in, the Midwest your entire life. And maybe 3 generations, your body is no longer equipped to be at the equator. So it's like, once again, like even if it presents differently right now, currently, your body is still, it's adapted to living in the Midwest. It's not adapted to living in the equator. So all the time I'd be treating more individuals with darker complexions that would burn worse than, the people coming over from England. So it's like, like they would have worse rashes and prickly heat and all that kind of stuff because, everyone's putting so much body butter on their skin that, well, you're putting wax on your skin can't breathe. So then you're going to have rashes everywhere. So, it was funny because so many times it'd be like, okay, like I get on the phone, get on the microphone and be like, learn before you burn. And then like I do this whole little presentation and like the amount of people that I was actually putting like tea tree and aloe to like actually open their pores and helping them breathe again to like get on top of the heat rash was really interesting. But yeah, more often than not, it was individuals that were from some of the northern states or from Canada or whatever. And you're like, okay, well, yes, like ancestrally, you should be, a sun god or goddess. But like at the end of the day, you haven't exposed yourself to sunlight, and the sun is very different in Canada and
Hmm.
in, in the
Yeah.
Midwest and, in the northern states than it is in when you're along the equator. So,
Yeah.
it's having that awareness, but yeah, it's really interesting.
The angle, the intensity, the timing is just completely different depending on the season or depending on the location. So that's why I always think that any advice that we get, without having in consideration our biological profile, without having in consideration the season and the time of the year we're into, and without having into consideration the geographic location we're into, is doomed to fail eventually because it doesn't really consider who we are. And that's the issue with so many YouTube videos out there that have great advice, but since we don't know where the other person is, you can't really like advise them. That's why my framework is the epigenetic seasonal programming method. The reason it's epigenetic is because what you're mentioning. Your body epigenetically changes. It turns genes on and off. Like I think the ones that are on are very little compared to all the genes that we have to be on and off at any time. I think it's like a 4% that is on at all times. The rest is for those changes that are happening as we are in a certain environment. The environment is the one that triggers the epigenetic change. So what I find so interesting is that through ancestry, we can study that. So I like to think that when I came to the Midwest, um, I truly was like the first person in my lineage to experience the four seasons. Like I have thought about this before because I have gone through like 21 and me, I think it's called, or 23 and me, and look at the migration path of my ancestry. And they used to be like in the Sahara, and they moved to the bottom of Spain, where it's basically on the equator, very close to it. And then they moved to Venezuela, Colombia, Italy, and then they moved. And then I'm like the only one that kind of got away from the meridian of the earth, from the tropical environment. I'm like the first one experiencing that through my lineage. Like I actually thought about that, and that explains why I felt so ignorant about something. Because a lot of times we go into stuff and we think we know, we think that we have an idea. Very not very often we realize that we know nothing about something, and that is what I felt when my wife goes to me and say, "Oh, sweetie, you just have the winter blues," and I'm like, what is that? Like what? Like I'm not crazy. Like what is the winter blues? Like I have no idea. When I started looking into it, I realized I have no clue. It's like I'm at zero. Like I have nothing to understand how these seasons really affect you or what to expect or what to do or what to feel. It's like I felt like I had no control. I had no idea what was happening. And it goes back to the fact that I believe that I'm the first one in my lineage to experience this seasonal living. Like nobody else before me experienced the four seasons before. So I feel it's very fitting to become the seasonal expert and to actually study it into detail because I feel that I was handed like an empty check, like a blank page, like a new opportunity where I have no idea of this. And then somehow I found it extremely interesting because for me it became like my kryptonite. Like the beginning, it was like I have no idea of this, and I would just struggle and struggle and struggle like year after year. And it's like that's when it's like if I want to be good in life, if I want to actually live a good life, I have to figure this out. Like it's survival. Like there is not just a desire to know or anything. Like if I don't figure this out, I'm not gonna be able to achieve the stuff I want to achieve in this world. So I going back, I think that's where my desire for this comes from. Like being the first one. Like I feel like a little like a not a colonizer, but like a sailor. Like I feel like somebody colonizing a new thing, and I think it's because of that. I think that nobody in my lineage had experienced this before. So I find it interesting, and I agree with everything that you just said so far. So to close the episode, I want to go back to where we start, which is harmonizing. Often we use the word balancing, but I like to use the word harmonizing, or masculine and feminine. We live in a world that absolutely trumps on masculinity and cheers the achievement, cheers the go-getter, um, and we don't leave much room for the feminine to flourish. Even women, you see a lot of that nowadays, that they become very masculine and great. Like I applaud all that, but I also want to acknowledge that trying to find that harmony within us, like that doesn't make me not masculine at all. Like, I like a good fight. I like all this, but I also have become in tune with my feminine side. And perhaps that's the side of me that reflects in the work that I'm doing. I first became aware of that side of me when I was a designer because I used to be a home builder, and I'm still in the real estate world, and I do a lot of kind of like designing, picking stuff here and there. I used to be a little ashamed about it, and I would tell all my contractors, "Oh yeah, that's what the designer picked. That's what the lady designer picked." Like it was kind of like a joke, but it was also hiding that feminine side of me. And I think that when you and I connected, that was something that you brought up immediately. So I just want to open up the floor to see where we land this episode on that subject, because I think that everything that we have talked so far relates to that in a way or another.
I think when it comes to harmonizing our masculine and feminine, and I like that, because truly it's about it's dancing with the both, right? So it's embracing both of it. I was in my unhealed feminine, so I was in my hyper masculine, or doing always hyper masculine action, driving, leading, controlling, all that kind of stuff. So for me, I didn't, even though there was always the creative side of me, I wasn't ever receiving, and I wasn't, I couldn't, I didn't allow others to lead, because once again, these are all safety things, right? It wasn't safe for me to let anyone else lead, and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's so important to embody both, like I still take action, and that's my masculine, even though now I'm in my feminine, like I've always been in my feminine operating system, but now that's healed, because I can still take action, but it's no longer leading with the toxic traits like competition and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's still, there's still a moving forward. I'm still taking conscious co-creative action, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm no longer, that's not tied to performance and self-worth, and that's no longer tied to competition and needing to be the best. Like there's, I know my own greatness, and all that kind of stuff, that I work towards that, of showing that, of being vulnerable, of doing all that. But I think, going back to the disconnect, because that's really what it comes down, when we're so disconnected from both sides energetically, when we're disconnected from the 5D and the 3D, when we're disconnected, and from our masculine and feminine energy, when we're so in one or the other, that's when we fall out of alignment. That's when we are no longer harmonized. That's when we are out of balance, and that presents us being stressed. It makes us continue to spiral. We can't find that peace, we can't find that freedom. And the end goal of all the work that you and I both do is that we can find freedom, we can find alignment, we can find peace, when we can actually connect and harmonize our intuitive side to our body, our 5D to the 3D, our masculine and feminine energy. When we can harmonize those two, when we can get back to that wholeness and like bring it all in, then we get to find that peace, then we get to find that freedom, and then we can continue life, and feel light, and feel free, and feel excited, and feel abundant, and all of
Mm-hmm.
the above. But when one is out of whack, when we're just in the 5D and we don't believe any intuitive thoughts, or when we're just in the 3D and we're not taking care of our vessel in the 3D, when we're just in our feminine and not doing any action, when we're just, once again, if you're on one side of the pendulum, if you're, one side of the scale and not the other, it's about finding that
Mm-hmm.
balance. It's about finding the harmony of knowing, yep, doing masculine action, but in my feminine operating system, as opposed to driving, controlling out of fear and
Mm-hmm.
discomfort, and all the things that drive us to be insane. So it's about finding that balance and finding that peace, and that's the end result when we can harmonize in the middle. So, or in that wholeness.
I agree. I think that's why I fall in love with this work, and why the seasons resonated to me so much. It is because I realized that through years of experimentation, you often hear in the winter is to rest and relax and so on. It's like basically the feminine side, like, letting go and let things happen. And at one point in my life, I would just don't do anything. I tried doing that in the winter. I tried doing that in the summer. I did a lot of experimentation through it. And then before that, I was just driving, driving, driving. In the wintertime, it would just leave me exhausted. And what I found is like that harmony is know what to do in which season. Like we have different seasons, and when we can harmonize that action, I think the best way to explain it is the Wu way. So it's like the action of inaction. I believe it's like it might be a little slightly different, but it's taking action without taking action. And I think in order to do that, we have to surrender. So surrendering to what? Surrendering to a rhythm, surrendering to a flow. It's like when you go down the river, if you just let go, you are going to actually enjoy the ride. You're going to get there. If you try to swim against the current, then good luck. You're going to exhaust and you're going to burn out. If you try to go faster down the river, sure, it might work for a while, but you're not going to enjoy the ride, and you're going to get tired too. So eventually you have to slow down and flow with it. And that is the beauty of finding those seasons, connecting to those energies, and flowing with it. It's trying to find that flow. And it doesn't look like this, like you just go dramatically up and dramatically down. It's something mild, it's just like small adjustments, becoming aware gradually. We can take action now and learn the way as we go. And it is, again, accepting, acknowledging, and surrendering. You cannot have surrendering within the masculine. I think within the feminine is that we're able to let go and enjoy the ride. Because the masculine is going to try to control, 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 do. And guess what? That just leaves us exhausted. So I fall in love with the seasons because it's the natural rhythm of the masculine and the feminine. This is defined within the yin yang. And what I found is that all through our life, we see those signals, the lighting patterns. Like the lighting follows the yin yang curve. The economy, there is some times where we spend more money, sometimes where we spend less money. The way that we feel, it all follows the seasonal rhythm. So I find that very fitting to conclude our episode within that harmony. So I hope that we have inspired you to be harmonized, to be balanced, to know when to turn your parasympathetic system on and your sympathetic system on. Again, your fight or flight, or you're relaxing. That happens throughout your day. But when you start zooming out and you start looking at different patterns, there's a pattern of your day, there's a pattern of your week, there's a pattern of your season, and then there's a pattern of your year. They tend to repeat themselves. So what I want to encourage you to do is to look at those patterns and realize that everything that happens to you happens for a reason, is meant to be, and more importantly, there must be a pattern. This is not just a random event that is happening. I might be doing this more than once. In which pattern? Is it the daily pattern, the weekly pattern, the seasonal pattern, or the yearly pattern? So that then you can start to predict them. And again, the goal for you is to balance and harmonize your masculine, your feminine, so that you can live in harmony. So thank you so much, Lara. Thank you so much, everybody that listened so far. As always, please keep it seasonal, and I will see you in the next episode.